Hi, everybody. This is SAAD. Many of you will often write me to ask about book recommendations, and I think so far I've only done one previous such episode on the SAAD Truth. And so today I thought that I would add to that series. Most of the times when people write to me, it's typically to ask me about books that I might recommend within the evolutionary psychology sphere. And so I thought that I would briefly discuss three such books today. The first one is, technically speaking, not evolutionary psychology. And I know this is mirrored, and don't start writing comments that the title is mirrored and so on. This is The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Came out in 1976. Now, it's not technically speaking evolutionary psychology, only because the term evolutionary psychology only came to be around the late 80s. But of course, it laid the ground or popularized many of the subsequent evolutionary principles that evolutionary psychologists use. And incidentally, selfish gene does not imply that people are selfish. I highly recommend you read this book. I think it has reached well over, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but 1 million copies sold, which is quite extraordinary for a book of its type. I've tried to no avail to get Richard Dawkins to come on my show. He does follow me on Twitter, and he has commented about some of my stuff in the past. But I'm sure that maybe he's not as active in his public appearances. But of course, if Professor Dawkins, you're listening, love to have you on the show. So check out The Selfish Gene. It certainly lays the ground to many of the subsequent ideas that evolutionary psychologists covered. So this is, the book, if you'd like, if you're going to put it within a rubric, it comes within the sociobiology umbrella. And then this book, there's another book that I was going to mention, but I've already plugged it when Robert Wright and I chatted, The Moral Animal. It's a book that came out in I think it was 94 or 95, that again popularized many of the ideas of evolutionary psychology. So I would definitely check out that book. This is another popular book by one of the pioneers of evolutionary psychology, David Buss, who's been on this show also. The Evolution of Desire, fantastic book. It focuses on evolutionary roots of human mating. So if you're looking for a broader discussion of how evolutionary psychology might be applied beyond mating, then that wouldn't be the right book. But it's certainly a great book for you to read as a starter for some of the key issues when it comes to sex differences in mating preferences. And then one that I recently tweeted about, this is the Bible. You ready? Oh yeah, The Adapted Mind. Tooby and Cosmides husband-wife team from University of California, Santa Barbara, two of the editors and two of the pioneers of evolutionary psychology, and then Jerome Barco. I know all three of them. Jerome is a lovely guy, as are John and Lida. Back, I think in 2003, they had invited me to their Center for Evolutionary Psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I had given a lecture there. Truly giant thinkers. I mean, if you're looking at pointing to someone who has true intellectual profundity, that couple, that's a power couple right there. Many, many good stuff in this book. The first chapter by Tooby and Cosmides is just an opus. I can't remember exactly how many pages. It's roughly something like 100 pages. And it really lays a contrast between evolutionary theorizing when it comes to human behavior and what they call, or the acronym that they give, the SSSM, which is the Standard Social Science Model. And so if you're interested in looking at the difference between sort of the hardcore social constructivists and those who incorporate evolutionary thinking in human behavior, then you want to check out that chapter. There's a chapter by a prophet who, I would say prophet, but I guess she doesn't She doesn't use the French version of the term. Prophet is the one who came out with the evolutionary explanation for pregnancy sickness, which I often use when I'm explaining the difference between proximate and ultimate explanations. And then she sort of disappeared. There's a really interesting story about how she came out of nowhere. She wasn't sort of the typical academic with a tenure track position, and then sort of fell off the face of the earth. So you might want to check out her story, Prophet, Profet. There is a chapter by Steven Pinker and Paul Bloom. There's chapters on sex differences and spatial abilities. There's a chapter on evolutionary aesthetics. So if you really are interested in looking at how evolutionary principles and evolutionary psychology is applied to a myriad of fields, then you definitely want to start with this classic. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a bit more technical in that it wasn't necessarily written for a broad layman audience, but it's certainly, I think, something that you can sink your teeth into. So there you have it. Selfish Gene, check it out. The Evolution of Desire and The Adapted Mind. You certainly can't go wrong with these three classics. I will try to have these types of book recommendation episodes more frequently. As I've said before, only in my personal library I have hundreds and hundreds of books, many of which I've read and devoured, but a whole bunch of other ones that I haven't, and that causes me great pain and anguish to know that there's all this incredible knowledge out there that's not yet in this brain. So there you have it, folks. We're having some fantastic weather in Montreal. I feel as though I'm in Southern California. There you have it. Hope you're doing well. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.